Welcome to the Safeguarding Podcast. In each episode, we discuss a different topical safeguarding issue with a range of different guest speakers. Please be aware some of this content is sensitive and listener discretion is advised. In this episode, we speak to the founders of the Safeguarding Company, Mike Glanville and Martin Baker, about their background in child protection and safeguarding and why they founded the company. Hello everyone, welcome to the Safeguarding Podcast. My name's Georgia, I'm the content manager here at the Safeguarding Company. I'm really pleased today to be joined by the two founders of the company, Mike and Martin. Do you two want to introduce yourselves, please?
Yes, hi everybody, my name's Mike Glanville, and I'm the Chief Safeguarding Officer and one of the co-founders for the Safeguarding Company.
Hi, yes everybody, I'm Martin Baker, I'm the CEO of the Safeguarding Company and again, one of the founders of the company.
Perfect. I wanted to check in with you guys about your backgrounds, first of all, if that's all right. Mike, could we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so my background's in policing. So I was in fact, to start off back in the 1980s, I was actually a child protection officer for some time. I spent most of my career working on CID and finally ended up as the Assistant Chief Constable in Dorset. So I had quite a lot of responsibility for both adult and child safeguarding in that role. I also sat on the local Children's Safeguarding Board. And throughout my career, I've been involved quite a lot in child protection investigations and, either involved in the investigation or running the investigation as a senior investigating officer. So it's, so quite a bit of experience.
You could say that.
Yeah, managing investigations involving, safeguarding issues, particularly around children. So I suppose that's really informed me in terms of, and helped, I suppose, hugely in terms of the role that I'm carrying out now. So quite a broad sort of range of experiences in and around safeguarding and child protection. Yeah.
Over to you, Martin.
Well, like Mike, I am a recovering police officer.
That's right.
And so I served in 5 UK police forces in England and Wales during my police service, ultimately as Chief Constable of Dorset Police, but I was 13 years in the Metropolitan Police, predominantly in criminal investigation, and quite a piece of that time in counter-terrorism work. But then I worked in the west of England, Hereford, Worcester, Shropshire. I went across and worked in Wales, in Gwent Police, and I worked in Gloucestershire before finally moving to Dorset as the Chief Constable. So, again, like Mike, throughout my career I've been involved in a lot of child and adult safeguarding, but also in lots of associated areas such as domestic abuse and sadly, obviously at times, domestic homicide and various other kind of crimes that really have, I guess, shaped me as well as me being involved in investigating them over time. And I always kind of felt when I was, in charge of a police force, going into a custody suite and you actually saw all of the people that had been arrested. During the course of my career, you talk to victims, you talk to witnesses, and the one thing they've all got in common is that they all went to school at some stage.
Yes.
I've been a school governor and I'm a trustee in a multi-academy trust and have been for a number of years now. And Mike's involved in school governance too. And I think we both see how powerful a child's experience in education can be in shaping the rest of their lives. So I think that's probably what's brought us to this point in our careers today, when back in 2014 we decided to found the Safeguarding Company and to actually work full-time in the field.
Wonderful. So how did the two of you actually meet? I've been here for over a year and I've never heard the story.
Right. So Martin actually, when he came to Dorset as Chief Constable, I was the head of CID at the time. So we first came into contact then. In fact, I remember Martin coming along for the actual. He was doing some research for the interviews actually, for the job, and so that was the first time I came into contact with Martin, and we worked for quite a number of years then, because that was way back in 2008, was it? 2007?
2005.
Wow, yeah. So there you go. So 2005, And then eventually I became an assistant chief constable. Was obviously working on this, working for Martin in the senior leadership team within the force at that time. So we've worked together, for quite a number of years.
So before the safeguarding company and before my concern, I believe you two had a safeguarding consultancy called One Team?
Well, it wasn't directly safeguarding. Yeah, absolutely. When Mike and I were coming to the end of our policing careers, it was 2012. We were involved in a big security operation in Dorset around the Olympics of 2012, around all the waterborne events. And we actually had been through a really difficult time with austerity and money being taken out of policing. And we'd done an awful lot of work together around leadership development, around systems thinking. And we decided we wanted to continue to work together because, we'd really enjoyed doing what we did. So we actually worked with a number of private sector companies, set up our own consultancy to try and improve the way that they deliver a service to the police service, actually. Because if you understand your customer better, you're obviously going to give a better service. And for us, that was really, really important. I mean, the one thing about the police is that there's nothing so ex as an ex-police officer. So you would never, ever try and use your influence back in the police service. But the one thing we could do was to actually enable providers to the police service to deliver a better service to the customer, because we could give them the customer's point of view, if you like. So we were working together doing that, and actually truly found it quite frustrating.
Why was that?
Well, because we were developing kind of advice to the people we were working with who wouldn't always put it into action.
Oh, it's like when you go and you have a personal trainer at the gym and they're like, eat better, exercise 4 days a week. And you're like, yeah, and then none of that happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah.
So, we were developing all these ideas and strategies to be better at serving the community ultimately through the police force, and not getting the traction. And of course, when you've come out of jobs where you can make things happen, when you can't make things happen, that gets really frustrating after a while.
Incredibly frustrating, I'm sure.
So we were kind of looking at each other thinking, whoa, wow, this is not quite what we thought it would be. And then one day, we were both at the time school governors, and Mike went into the school where he was chair of governors and asked the head teacher that simple question, Helen, how do you record safeguarding concerns?
That's where it started. I mean, that was back in, I think it was March, wasn't it, 2013. So I'd gone into the school to help out with a safeguarding review, essentially. It was like a mini safeguarding audit at the time. So I was actually sat down with the head teacher. We were having a discussion about how they were handling safeguarding concerns. And as Martin said, asked that question, how do you handle the actual concerns themselves? Where do you record them? And with that, she pulled out a kind of drawer, and in the drawer was this big red folder.
Oh no!
And in the folder was a whole load of loose leaf kind of documents and sticky yellow notes and all sorts of stuff. And it kind of, you kind of looked at it in horror actually, because obviously coming from a background in the police where literally everything was digitised, and very organised when it came to the handling of quite sensitive information. And this was very sensitive, information. And so that's, I suppose, where it all started. And we started to have conversations about, how schools could improve that situation. Was there anything out there for them to be able to use to improve the recording process? And we soon realised that actually quite a number of schools, in fact the majority of schools, were in the same situation. Most schools were at that point, were recording concerns in that way. And what was interesting at that time was that we'd had the Daniel Pelker case was just about, the serious case review was just about to be published. And we had the new KICSI, Keeping Children Safe in Education Guidance, was also about to be published in September of 2013. And I mean, thinking, I was just reflecting that, back then, I think that the original KICSI guidance was something like 37 pages or something. I mean,
how long is it now?
It's about 167 or something like that. So it's obviously, and that tells you something. That tells you something about how safeguarding has moved on from 2013, 2014. That's where it started. It started with Martin and I then talking about, well, actually, how do schools manage safeguarding? What is the best approach to safeguarding, and what in terms of safeguarding practice within a school? We talked to a lot of safeguarding leads, didn't we, in schools about how they go about managing safeguarding. And we turned that into a safeguarding model, essentially. And the model kind of sets out 8 foundational principles, that schools should be working to in terms of, a kind of reliable, if you like, practice. And we called it the strategic safeguarding model. So that's kind of where it started. It started with that thinking. Before we ever even got to, talking about and thinking about software, it started off with the practice of safeguarding. And we did a lot of research, didn't we, as well, talking to lots of experts in the field and doing a lot of research on the legislation and the guidance and good practice to get to the point where we felt confident that we could do something then to support schools to improve their safeguarding. So that's where it started.
Amazing. I know that there's a paragraph in the book you two wrote. I believe it's from Sue Bailey, who mentions the first time she saw My Concern, first time she logged in and looked at it, and she wanted to cry for the relief that you understood what she was going through, having to safeguard over a multi-academy trust. I think she mentioned people leaving sticky notes on her desk with concerns, her having to record all this, try to keep paper files. It sounds like a nightmare. So it sounds like what you guys have done is honestly quite amazing. And you saw there was a need to support all organisations with safeguarding. So at that point, once you had the idea for it, how did you go into development?
Well, I mean, we kind of worked out that there's a workflow here, there's a process here that if you can get people to follow it, actually, wittingly or unwittingly, they're going to do the right thing if you can get them to the point of following a good process. So we then started to think about software, and like you do, we were in a pub.
We're all great ideas.
Having a conversation with a friend of ours, and we were talking about this and the need to build some software, and people were giving us all kinds of ideas and options about how we might get that done. And it turned out that our friend's son worked as a project manager in a software company in Talbot Green, near Cardiff in South Wales. And that's how we were introduced to our third co-founder, Daryl Morton, because Daryl was the owner of a software company that was building systems for British Airways, Associated British Ports, all kinds of the NHS. So we met Daryl in May 2014. We formed the company in June 2014. We'd obviously done a lot of thinking about what the software needed to do. So his team sat down and interviewed us. It felt like interminably for about 2 months about what about this, what about that, what if that happens, and what. And by September 2014, we had the first iteration of the software. And we trialled My Concern in some schools local to us down in Dorset. And in January 2015, we took the product to market. And it's been an incredible journey ever since, really. But that's how it happened.
Can you explain the name? Why My Concern?
Well, that's interesting. Anybody that's ever kind of, been involved in branding will know how difficult it is sometimes to come up with a name that doesn't sound ridiculous or doesn't say what the product or service actually does. We kind of, all aware of those things. So we actually spent some time with a branding consultant, and that might sound very grand, but it wasn't. It was a guy from the business next door to Daryl's software company, who was a great guy and does great work. But we literally spent, hours and hours thinking about what could we call this product. And actually, my concern came up fairly early on. And it's one of those things that during the course of the day, you just kept circling back to it. And you kept coming back to it because it describes exactly what it is. I've got a concern. It's my concern and I need to report it. Equally, there was something about, no, it's your concern and you've got a duty to report it because it is your concern and you need to do something about it. So it was very personal in that sense, and very human. And it's a phrase we all use in general conversation every single day without thinking too much about it.
And one of the things we came across in the early days as well with staff in schools was their reluctance sometimes to report concerns. And the reason for that is because they were worried about, accusing somebody of something really serious, without justification. And so I think the kind of name my concern kind of helps to kind of overcome that. You don't have to this isn't about necessarily reporting something really serious.
It's not an accusation, is
no,
it?
it's not about exactly.
My accusation.
It's not called my accusation or my allegation.
And you don't need to really worry about what this concern is in a way, in the sense of trying to, work out whether it's, this form of abuse or that form of abuse or whatever. This is about you saying, you've got some real concerns about this particular issue, this incident, this child or whatever. And the system's kind of enabling you to be able to report that, And I think that's what we came to, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Was that actually that, perfectly really describes, we think, the mindset or the mindset of individuals that when they're reporting concerns,
This incident, this situation is making me feel uncomfortable. I've got a concern about it. And it was as simple as that. It's not, doesn't have to be, oh yes, this is definitely a serious situation and I've definitely got... No, I'm concerned about it. This is making me feel uncomfortable. Yeah. And giving people permission to share that concern.
I was just going to say, it almost feels quite empowering for those staff members to go, I have a concern and I'm allowed to report it. It's better for me to tell someone, to have it written down on the system where people can view it, where everyone understands it, and not like, oh, I'm being silly, I'm overreacting, it might not be anything.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It was... Because it was such a personal thing, my concern, and I'm allowed to have a concern, actually.
Yeah.
And I'm allowed to report it, and I'm allowed, to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
So it was very, very personal, was it? So, we put a lot of work into coming up with the blindingly obvious first thing that we came up with.
It's always the obvious one.
Exactly,
I think the other good thing about the name as well is we always talk about safeguarding being the responsibility of everyone in the organisation. And the name of the product allows them to go, oh, I do have a concern and it is my job, even though I might not be the lead safeguarding person. I might not be the lead safeguarding person. I still need to report the things I'm concerned about. So I think that message comes across quite nicely.
Yeah, it does.
And it's really important. I mean, if you're a lunchtime supervisor in a school, and I've got a concern, then I'm entitled for that concern to be taken seriously.
Yes.
And I want to report it, and I don't want to feel that nobody's going to be listening. They don't want to hear from me. They want life to be calm and not have any ripples in the road. No, I've got a concern, and I want to tell you about it.
Yeah, it's really important. And that was the other thing that we came across as well in those early days as well, was one of the first things I think safeguarding leads used to say to us, if you're going to develop anything, if you're going to introduce a system in schools, make sure it's easy for staff
simple,
to be able
secure,
to access and use. And that was a really good piece of advice.
Yeah.
And absolutely essential. So that kind of goes alongside the kind of the branding as well as the name of the actual product, is that sense that, this is available to everybody. It should be available to everybody, and it's easy to access and it's easy to use, because, the essential thing about obviously child protection, safeguarding and child protection, is that you're in a position to identify those concerns. So the reporting element of that is critical.
It's amazing. It's good how it all links together. While we're talking about branding and renaming, we should also probably talk about how the company has recently been renamed. So I think September 2021 we became the Safeguarding Company.
Well, this again is a glimpse of the blindingly obvious. Because Mike and I had, as we said earlier, a consultancy company called One Team Advisory. And our other co-founder, Daryl, had a software company called Logic Software. Mm-hmm. So like all good founders, we just smashed the two names of the companies together and called it One Team Logic. But then we thought that doesn't explain to anybody what we do. So we then, about a year later, put a strapline underneath it that said One Team Logic, the safeguarding company, because we had to explain what One Team Logic was.
Yeah.
So again, we worked with some branding guys who, you know, eventually brought us to the blindingly obvious solution that we should just call ourselves the safeguarding company, because that's what we do. And it took us from, 7 years.
Yeah.
But we got there in the end.
Got there at the end, yeah.
And it feels like a release, really. We've been emancipated because
Yes.
people now know what we do, and we can talk about it, without having to explain. What
Don't
the
have to
company name
explain
is.
it, do
There is
you?
nothing to explain.
We work for the safeguarding company.
Exactly.
That's
And
it.
that's what we do.
Perfect. I feel like we've come full circle. So thank you so much for joining me here today.
Great.
No,
Thanks
great
so much,
pleasure.
Georgia.
Thanks, Georgia.
Thank you for listening to the Safeguarding Podcast. For resources and more information about our safeguarding solutions, please visit thesafeguardingcompany.com.